How's it going, guys? Local painter and gamer. My name's Omar. I'm a tattoo artist from Queen's Gold Tattoo Parlor located in Sanger. Here to showcase some custom models, some painting, and maybe some advice or to help the beginner progress if you're about to enter an escalation league like one we just got through a season. I was explaining to Adam how you enter the escalation league trying to learn by points, or your intro to the game is one of the best ways to learn the game. At the same time, you have an incentive to paint your units, your armies as you're playing, so this can be a really good chance for you to have a completed army by the end of the league with painted miniatures that look great on the table. I'm going to show you guys some examples of some minis I had together for the league in the unit. These are the Wookiees I customized. So they're not based because I wanted to showcase what you can do with some techniques that look good on the table and you're able to just put them out there. Some of these guys I customized using green stuff, extra parts like the Chieftain. He's able to, let me see here. Is that in focus? How's that? Make sure you guys are
Right
in focus.
there.
All right.
Come back.
Here.
Right there, yep.
Cool. So this is the Chieftain. There's not really a miniature for him. What I did is I got extra parts from the Wookiee Bits and made a Chieftain myself with the bowcaster. Plus we have the melee guys. I mean, when you think Wookiees, the color scheme can be pretty dull. They're brown. That's the first thing you think of Wookiees. You know, the whole walking carpet. The way I start off is, this is an example. This is a primer with zenithal from above. That helps the details, the raised areas of the miniature pop out, especially if your eyesight isn't that great. It helps to have a nice zenithal. So this guy, I got Andor here. He's ready to paint, so I figure I'd bring some examples of what to do for not just, spray painting it black, but also having a little bit of the detail from above. Same concept with this rebel, one of the rebel officers. I did the zenithal, but with an airbrush. I started his, from the legs, the bottom torso, everything's up in reverse. So if you can see, I said, okay, here's going to be the mid-tone, and the base is going to be that kind of a brownish color. So I went ahead and shot that from the bottom up with airbrush. And the zenith area is going to be all the highlighted areas above, and that kind of helps you get the miniature started. I had a few guys here that are ready to go with tabletop quality. I got some Pathfinders, so this is what it'll look like once you have some more of the details going on.
Bring it back to you.
All right,
There you go.
those are right here.
Yeah.
So I have a few Pathfinders here. This is once I show you guys how to do, a whole unit. Once we get painting, I figured tonight we could work on some rebel troops. So let's go ahead and start. I already started with the base coat. I figured we'd do some cool brown tan scheme and put the unit together to show you guys how we can kind of break a few steps, between 4 to 5 steps, to get a nice tabletop quality out of your miniatures. I started with their coats, pants, just to kind of make the unit in itself, especially if you have color coordinated units, you can separate them and have easier for you to spot. So we have the next step that I'd like to do is start doing like the shirts, leave weapons to last, but all this is going to be like the base coat stuff. So let's start off with the shirts. I'm going to start off with Citadel, kind of a layer, which is the Deathclaw brown, one of my favorite browns to start for shirts. As far as brushes go, I like using some of the local hobby stores. They have really good selections of brushes. You can't really go bad with trying out the high-end brushes, but at the same time, I like to, just stick to basics. So I know a lot of people that will spend, it's part of your tools, which eventually, the more that you progress, the more you paint, you're going to want to invest in some good tools. These are a little bit, whenever I'm going to go into the pot to pull out paints, I'm using like an older synthetic brush just to kind of scoop things out, especially with washes because they separate the bristles a lot. They start to break apart in the very tip. So sometimes over time you want to start shaping it, whether with your X-Acto blade, you start to, because they'll get frayed, they start, you can see in comparison. This is a new brush, which is kind of like your layer, and you see that point of this older brush that's been through it. I've even taped it to this kind of helps me pick it apart so I can use this for whether I'm using washes, glazes, kind of the dirty tractor work, and then you have your nice Ferrari over here. So whenever I'm working with the newer layers, I'm always sticking to something with, I know a lot of brushes, they have different markings, whether it's layer 5, layer 4, 3, but you can tell if you're working on a miniature this big, you don't want to have something that's going to overpower an area, especially when you're thinking about brush control. You have something that's way out of size, that it's the size of this, miniature's face. You're going to want to step down to at least anywhere between the smaller layer brushes, which is between the 3s, 2s, 4s. The finer detail brushes are going to be 00s, or like they'll just indicate detailed brush. If you go to the higher end stores, you can get those fine true hair brushes, and those are more expensive. Once you get the feel for synthetics, I recommend people to switch over. But if you're starting off, you don't know yet if you're going to get into how far you're going to take the paint perspective of it. Maybe this is like your pastime, or if you're going to want to pursue it to really push to get competitive with painting, that's totally on you, which I recommend everybody to try to push without getting the, how should I say it? Some people get discouraged painting. I feel like to stay in the game is to make sure it's fun. And so let's begin with, once I pulled the paint out, we're gonna go here. Very controlled, very thinned out paint. I'm using a wet palette so that I can layer out which colors I'm gonna do. I already have some set aside as far as the color scheme goes. Their pants are gonna be a little darker just to differentiate them. I'm gonna start using the layer for their jackets, and we're gonna start with control, and consistency is key. So it helps when you zenithal that you're able to see where all the details are. And I have, sometimes as you're painting, you're gonna be like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna try to separate details as far as, they got gloves, they've got buttons, they have a leather strap of the belt, the backpack. Where does the weapon start? Things like that. You can then choose to have different colors for those things. I like to, if I ever see, for instance, like this is, I don't want it to look like a Wookiee brown trooper unit. If I already have brown Wookiees on there, I'm going to give them that brown glory. These guys I want to kind of mess around with differentiating the tones, contrasts, and just right here what I'm doing is it's really thin layer. That's why wet palettes come in hand. I know people use the dry palettes, or even the plate works, and there are many videos out there that show how to make a homemade DIY wet palette. But starting off, make it easy for yourself. Don't stress yourself out to paint. I want people to be more motivated to paint, and the last thing you want to be hindering you is because I don't know how to thin my paints, or my paints just come out way too thick, my brushes aren't working with me. There's so many factors. I asked recently some people, hey, like what's your flaw about painting? What kind of holds you back from painting? A lot of people said, well, work, and we get it, life and all that. But it's, I'm not trying to tell people, no, you need to paint, but paint on the brush every day, or at least every other night, or once a week, 2 times a week. Just helps big time as far as keeping yourself motivated to paint. And it's really nice when you step back and you're like, oh man, look what I created. It might be a stressful, sometimes it might be a stressful process, but I feel like once you see what you've created, that should be motivating in itself. Let's see here. So I make sure I keep an eye on, I don't want to get, sometimes this could be like the sloppy stage, and I tell people, hey, trust in the first stages, trust in the progress and process. Don't see that it's like, okay, the paint's going all over the place. You need to learn, like this brush has a little bit of a longer, the hairs, and you'll see other brushes. Let me pull out like a Citadel brush. This is a similar sizing. I think this is one of their Citadel layer brushes. You can tell the difference as far as the length of them. That can be something that you need to also be aware of. As soon as I have like, you have a bigger puddle of painting, the pot, whatever paint you had out on your palette, I'm trying to thin it out where it's easier that if I want to go into another layer, I'll give myself some room to have another room for another lighter color, a highlight, which later on as we go, it'd be cool to have a segment of different things. So this is kind of like your intro, get some layers down, make the army look good, get your league going, get your extra point for painted miniatures, and also get motivated to paint more. It could be anything, but the key is when you're doing your base, mindful of the control of brush. So Adam, what flaws do you have that don't allow you to paint more often?
Time.
Yeah, time is a thing. We don't have enough time in the day sometimes. And painting would be more of your me time, right?
Yeah, but I don't get me time, man. I'm married.
Oh, I gotta make that happen. Let's see. The first layer is not going to be as, by the way, yeah, this is a live stream, but we are hanging out, Adam and I try to make him paint, but he instead wants to make kebabs and chill in the background. Shout out to Adam. We got the Lost Legion group. Let's see here. Have you painted miniatures?
Oh yeah.
I was gonna say you have a paint rack here.
Yeah, I just don't have time.
Cool. Layer 1, we got the jacket down. Another heavy. One thing that helps, if you can, pull up a picture of, or take a picture of your miniature. So I have Andor, I have Cassian. If I wanted to have like a nice background, take pictures of them, different angles, and it helps you visualize where you want to put your highlights, your midtones, your shadows. With this Rebel, one of the officers, I was able to kind of boost the shadows by shooting the undercoat from the legs up and then have the Zenithal from up down, and it'll kind of already kickstart that vibe or energy that you're going to put into that miniature. So as a good reference, it's always good practice to have kind of an idea of what you want to do. Look at that. There you go. There's Adam's hostage. Nice shiny pharaoh looking guy. What gold is that?
I don't remember. It's a Tamaya.
That's my paint. So I'll have a reference more or less of what would be a cool color scheme for these guys and miniature references, because it just helps us to kind of cross-reference those. Again, first layer, just get paint down, make sure it's not too thick so you don't kill details. And if you notice, I'm trying to post on the miniature. I know a lot of people use the handles. They use miniature handles, which are great. There's many handles out there as far as the ones that clip on a base. There are some that you could use, like the magnetic ones.
Hey, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what are your brush recommendations, and what is the best technique for keeping brushes nice?
So once you use the brushes that they have, I mean, you can find great brushes at our local stores. You can find the like starter set ones. This one's from Monument Hobbies. I have a few from like our local store. Allards is another art supply store. Citadel has really good beginner brushes, and Army Painter just recently released a set that I brought, which is this. I thought it'd be cool to try it because this is kind of like, hey, get your brush, and this is all your basic the brush sets. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of use this. It comes with a detail, base coat, and a dry brush, which I'll show you guys more or less some dry brush magic. But after you paint, especially a long session, if you notice this, the brushes they don't get saturated because I'm not trying to coat all the bristles. It goes maybe halfway. With cleaning, I have this water pot. I'm just literally going in there to break it apart, and then I'm reshaping it as I'm drying it off. Even if I'm using the same paint or the same ink, I'm kind of going back and forth with it. And it's all, I'm not beating up my bristles. Like, one thing is you got to treat your brushes like the fine princesses that they are. And I like to, once I clean them up, you can hang them upside down if you can. There's a lot of clips, just because once you do this, all this that you just once you have them right side up, which everybody wants to say, oh, protect the point. Sometimes the paint will seep down into it and it'll start corroding or destroying the base of it. And so it's sometimes great overnight, like for instance, you're painting, not to right away store your brushes. Flat is fine and all, but a lot of cases when you destroy the tips is when you're trying to put the plastic covers on. You got to be super careful because it can start to separate a lot of the little strands in there. So it's recommended to, once you're done painting, have your set of brushes like I explained that's going to use all the dirty work, like the washes, pulling paints out of the pot. Have those aside, still clean those up, try to have longevity of that brush, but at the same time, these newer brushes, especially when you get a new paintbrush, sometimes I found myself, I would buy all these brushes and I didn't want to use them because I was just weird like that. I was like, man, this is a brand new brush. I'm scared to use it because I know what happens after a while. The brushes get beat up, and that's just because poor aftercare instructions of how you're going to hang the brush once you cleaned it up really good. As far as, I don't know, people, I feel like I want everybody to try to just experiment out there. There's Walmart brushes that'll do okay. Any like Amazon brushes that come in with certain packs that are meant for like calligraphy. You definitely don't want the tools to work against you, and I know that could be frustrating. Like somebody says, oh well, I'm trying to paint, but I feel like my setup is not proper or it's not up to par, and I'm like, hey, maybe you should really do some research of maybe experiment with other brushes, or don't get too ahead of yourself. Just have fun with it. At any time, wait until you step back and you have some good quality stuff and you're like, all right, this is looking a little better. Don't expect it to be off the bat Mona Lisa on a miniature. You got to build that up. This is the layer one, I'm kind of running through paint because a lot of people, they say, well, I don't know how much time I'm gonna have to be able to paint. So I would recommend to just little by little start going into your pot. And so this is my synthetic older brush, and I'll go in and just start scooping stuff out, maybe about 2 times this much into the wet palette, and go back in. Be careful whenever you start adding more onto the palette that you're not going to contaminate, and go back in your pot and start destroying that pigment or the lid or wherever you're at, or your brush. Make sure before you switch colors and highlights. Sometimes highlights you can overlap with, but that's on palette and brush, not back into your pot, because then you start contaminating that color. But again, brush control, get the brush to work with you. Make sure you're posting to be able to make it a little more comfortable for yourself. We have that zenithal highlight on most of the miniatures, or the ones that I do at least. I like to do that so that I know where my and my start and my end point from highlighting. So if I want to work up to that, I can just completely ignore the top and make sure I get the bottom based. So I'm doing my base color, my first layer from the bottom, working up, and making sure I'm trying to just cover what needs to be based. And you'll see what I mean right now. See, this guy has a few pouches. He's one of the heavies for the Rebels. So I'm going to work up midway and just kind of start, while I'm running out of the paint on the brush, I'm starting to work it up, and I'll stop at a certain point and leave this little line here, because you could then, as you're running out of ink, you could almost treat this like a dry brush. There's a few techniques where you lay the brush down, and being careful, you don't want to start jabbing it, because there's stippling, which you could stipple blend, and you basically, any brush that you stipple with, for instance, this is my older one, but you're doing this to it, so you're beating up that tip of the brush, and you start to stipple, and as you go outward, the concept of it is from the darkest point, you're starting to blend, or at least get your next gradation or contrast, the hue, starting to lighten up and get it ready for the next color. And then you can blend the next color in and then stipple together, and it'll actually blend the two a little better. But again, that's going to beat up your brushes, so you got to be careful with some things that are, as far as dry brushing. That's why they have brush like that, where it's like a flat shovel, so that these nicer ones. Now, what I'm doing here is kind of like a feather, but it's able to leave that top part of the arm. I'm kind of allowing that space there, so that I could come up with a nice highlight. So this is, you can display these miniatures if you want to do competitive painting. I mean, absolutely, put hours into this. But let's say our match is this weekend. Today is midday, or we're on a Thursday night painting, and you got your escalation match is Saturday, and you need to knock out a whole unit that you're going to use, and you're like, all right, I need to get to painting, and I need to paint fast. I need to make it I need to get the standard in there, but I want to also try to impress whoever I'm playing, to be like, those look great, sure, but don't zoom in because I'm not done. So I'm trying to get you through it as far as what it'll be as tabletop. Let's see, quality. So when I'm thinking about that, I'm like, yeah, it'd be cool to add some highlights. If we're pressed for time, I'm gonna just dry brush this in there, but at least get something for a highlight. So this guy has like the strap from the heavy weapon around his shoulder. I'm gonna go ahead and go around that. It's cool because once you start layering the base and you start moving around, you start to see details that maybe you didn't see before. And underneath, a lot of people underneath shadows, they completely skip it. Like if it's a shadow area, they don't paint it at all. But why not try to test yourself, and why not try to start working? I do a lot of this posting to give yourself more of a steady hand, almost like you're playing pool, if that makes sense. But if you have a good brush, you're just kind of use the angle of it. Don't go in there, right away and start stabbing this guy with your brush, because again, let's be conscious about our brush tip here. I'm doing feathering, I'm back and forth motions, the stroke consistency. If I'm trying to keep it all cohesive so it all matches. I can crosshatch shading, which that would be the next step for our midtones. Right now I'm working on this guy's jacket base, so I'll get into that a little bit more. A technique that's also if it calls for it. If you feel like, hey, you know what, I can crosshatch shade, I'll go ahead and do that. But if not, I'm just gonna get the layers in. Try to get the stuff that's raised, because we're about to put some unicorn wash on this here. That's what we call a lot of the washes. It's like unicorn tears in a bottle, because it makes your miniature looks that much better. There's the thing about washes and glazes that you have to be careful that this layer that you're adding, it's going to obviously darken it up a bit. So if you're going to plan on doing the highlight, then do keep in mind that once you add that wash, it's going to go ahead and it's going to bring down your value of the brightness. So, moving on to the next guy. Again, just start covering the areas without trying to get too messy. It's okay if you cover, you're gonna clean it up. So let's just push on. Make sure your brush has enough ink, but not too much. The consistency of the paint is kind of translucent. You see how lighter that is? I kind of want to show you guys on this glove so you can kind of see. When you're trying to do base toning or your base coat, this is kind of a pretty good consistency here, your coverage. If you want to start moving into highlights, you're going to get rid of this tone into more of this range. Why? Because now it looks like a dry brush, and now you can blend the dry brush highlight into the base tone and move those two together and eventually bridge the gap. But this isn't a big surface. With these miniatures, they're not 72 millimeter scale miniatures or like the 172s where you have such a big area to cover. They're very small. Again, that's why we have to pick our brushes right as far as what you're going to take on, what brush are you going to do for this project, or what are you going to, what are you thinking about for completing this part at least, which you can get away with the layer brush throughout the whole miniature, but don't expect to get all those tiny little details. You cover more time. The bigger the brush, the faster the things will go by. As you're painting, sometimes you start, for instance, if you're starting in this area, by the time you get around here with all this coverage, this is going to dry, so you could start layering that second layer. So layers is key, obviously. If you want a color to really pop, we'll bump those layers up. Again, these pants, that was maybe 2 passes of this brown. I did that with these guys just to prep them up, and the commander. So the leader, I'm doing his jacket, but I don't want it to be like, hey, I'm gonna have a brown jacket, brown pant kind of guy. I'm gonna, try to differentiate their colors a little bit so that the unit doesn't look too similar. But I mean, you do want to have that cohesive, like, okay, this is orange unit or brown unit, or like the green jacket leader is with these guys, they have green pants. Things like that make it easier to find your miniatures on the tabletop also. I know some guys will paint the edges of the base. That's also a good thing to consider. Or they'll do like the top of their helmets or something. What do you do to you've done? I saw your troops. You have what, like pink, orange, right? You have like purples with some like the galactic, like Rex is what?
Yeah, I did the white with unit decorations of purple, pinks, which is something different.
Yeah, why not? That's cool.
Because otherwise I get all confused, like it's all white.
Right, exactly. And all rebels could be that foresty, elvish, green-looking rebels, and you want to have some sort of different.
I did make my Shadow Collective guys a green.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What paints do you use?
I cross off. I have a bunch of Tamayas, Citadels, and then some game colors. And then I'm starting to get into those Turbo Dorks.
Oh, those are cool. Yeah, Turbo Dorks is pretty cool. I know sometimes when you're getting into this hobby, you might be pressed with budgeting yourself because you're like, hey, I really want all this stuff. But, I mean, you get into your... I know a lot of people that's like, no, I have to have every color. And it's like, that's going to get pricey after a while. So you learn to make colors or stick to primaries, A lot of the beginner ink sets or color sets, they have primary colors, and that is good enough for you to paint so many different variations of for units and whatnot. It's hard to tell, but a lot of this these guys got creases and stuff that don't get too frustrated. It's like, oh, that's not, I can still see the primer. It's cool, let it dry, because you'll then be able to come back and maybe do that second layer. I have some fleets I was going to show off. These guys are also on the workbench. I only got their blue jacket. They're mainly just like a gray primer. I still did zenithal above. I was messing with some weapon colors, and some of the artworks you don't really see shiny guns or anything. So what I wanted to do is blacken out or darken out a lot of these weapons, or start off with that chrome, that silver gunmetal look, and then wash it down with something dark. I brought a few washes to kind of, this is the shade, like the Nolan oil is really good. I've been a really big fan of these speed paints. I know a lot of the guys have been using these. Why? Sometimes, so speed paints are, it's a high viscosity paint that helps you, it's almost like a wash. So it's lighter with very fluidy, it's kind of liquidy compared to what you're used to with the paint, the texture of it. And it's meant to go through the recesses and also, emphasizes those raised areas. I like using that, but I don't depend solely on that. I like to use it as a tool to add details. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, you can knock out miniatures with speed paint, that's their purpose, right? But why not use that in your technique of painting to say, hey, I'm going to do these base tones and everything, and then I have this really cool speed paint color that I'm going to add for extra details or extra shading, and that looks amazing. I like doing that with the leather, which that's why I brought a few speed paints with. So some flesh tones. This was a speed paint orc skin on this guy, and so I don't know if you can see this guy, how well you can see him, but how's that?
You're good.
Easy angle. So that was an orc skin speed paint from Army Painter. They put out their line, and this was in it, and I thought I'd give it a try. He has like that. He's that one alien out of the Pathfinders that just sticks out, and I thought it'd be cool to try for his skin. And again, I didn't solely just use that color. I used it almost as a contrast of it to have its like the first layer of it, and then I kind of highlighted on top of that. And so I'm gonna do that with their leather because I really like the way it looks. They have a hardened leather. They have, for the ion gun for these guys, I'm gonna show you guys some cool little. It's kind of like a object source lighting. The OSL is with the speed paint. You can do something cool with that. Layer 1 is going smooth. I already have these guys kind of ready. And think about it. You're at home and you have this unit out and you're like, okay, I'm going to knock this out tonight. It's possible. And you could have it ready for tomorrow and it looks good. And then you come back and revisit it before the next match and you can add extra stuff. I was talking recently with another fellow mate and I asked him about some processing about like the steps that you do with painting. You can revisit miniatures. I know some people's like, all right, when I call it, and I don't touch that mini anymore. But the more and I don't know if you've seen that, but I felt like the brush was, sometimes you need to stop, and before you go back into applying more ink or the color, you have to determine, is that way too much on the brush? If it is, you got to be careful or go back to your palette and kind of thin it out a little more while you're reshaping it. So don't just go back and smear it. Try to reshape it because that's just going to help the tip of the brush kind of help work with you instead of, the bristle might touch an area you don't want it to if you're already gotten so far in progress and you're like, oh man, if it wasn't for that little hair that touched the other area I wasn't trying to get yet or something, do be mindful of that. If you're like, okay, well, I kind of got in an area I didn't want to, well, kind of keep an eye on your brush. Sometimes I'll clip those or I'll get the X-Acto knife and I'll just start, after a while. Not a new brush, you shouldn't do that as long as you're very careful with storing. And like I said, after you're cleaning it, the way you set it to let it dry overnight or something, then you can go ahead and put the cap and put it back in your case. But try to have it just, hang low so nothing gets back into the metal part and then start damaging the base of it where it all begins. If you have it this way, moisture might go in there and just start, tearing it apart. So let's try to conserve our brushes, right? Let's get the most life that we can out of them. And then this brush someday will be that brush that I go into the pot and start scooping paint out. But so like I was saying, I ask people, okay, well, when you're done painting a miniature, do you revisit it? And sometimes they say, I don't know, I feel like whenever I'm done, and they they just kind of let it be. Well, why not go back and make yourself to improve? I feel like becoming, obviously, from one miniature to the next, you can start off with your leader, right? These two guys can be maybe like you're more careful, and then you get to the third guy and you feel a little better, more confident. You have three more guys to go, and your last guy just looks very lazy because you just kind of go in this, like, you're comfortable now, and you don't get it, you're not as detailed or as careful as when you first started. And I say, okay, well, knock out your full unit and then revisit it, just because, I mean, you can, or you could just let it be. I don't mean years from now. I mean within the time frame that you're painting. Like, I can go back, and I obviously a lot of these guys aren't based yet, so I can come back, base them, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to touch these highlights. I'm going to bring out the teeth. I'm going to bring out, let me knock out the eyes now, which that could be a cool segment, doing eye details and things like that, to really challenge yourself. The more you're painting, the more paint on brush per night, per week, whatever it is the case may be, the more you're doing that, the better, the more obviously the progression you're going to see. So why not spend from 40 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour each, hour and a half, and then you're like, you know what, now I'm completely happy. Again, this is a hobby. This isn't something, some people do this to build, play, or they feel forced to build their miniatures because they can't play the game without it. So I know you can just pay someone to commission it, paint, or you can, why not add that to the arsenal of hobbying? This is part of it. You can have a passion to play, passion to build, and paint, and see what you've created in the end. That kind of helps. So you want to be better at the hobby. It's one of those things. It's not a job. Don't suck the fun out of it. Have fun, but see how far you can progress. If you're getting into this, you're a beginner painter. Again, I know there's guys that are like, well, they've been painting for years. Well, try to do some research on how to do things better. I mean, there's progression in anything. You can kind of, there's always room for improvement in anything you do. So I feel like in this hobby, especially for painting, you can always improve. Pick from other people's ideas and techniques. This is kind of the technique I do, but again, this is for gaming. If you're going to spend hours on one miniature and you know this is going to be a display case miniature, that's a whole different approach. This approach is solely, I got my league, or I've got my games, or scratch the league. I'm just playing this game, right? I'm playing Legion, I'm playing Warhammer, whatever, and we have these plastics and they're all gray. I'm primering them, now they're all black. I zenithal them, now they look back to gray, but they have a little bit of more detail with white. So they're basically calling your name to paint. So why not try it? Get together with some peeps. I would love to get more paint nights going with people and start getting a kind of like a paint circle going. Because, a lot of different people I've talked to that paint, I'm always asking, okay, what about this? What do you do with this? And that's why I picked up different details and techniques. From basing yourself, I have a handle with me, and it's cool, but I like to have the full control, because if you notice, I'm rotating this miniature a lot. I'm not just working from one angle. And don't stop yourself from, like, sometimes my brush is just going back and forth, slow strokes, controlling it, the pressure, how gentle you're doing this. I mean, don't think you have to, again, load it. It's funny because when I paint with my kids, I see them paint and I don't say anything, but I want to see what they do. And they right away have their brush fully loaded up to the metal, and I'm cringing because I'm like, oh man, that thing's loaded with paint. And you're like, you don't need that much, but it's cool. Let's have fun. And then as the more they paint, I'm like, all right, let's try this now. Don't have to load it so much with paint. Let's thin the paint out a little more. You don't have to dump a whole pool. It's like you just dumped a pool of paint on your miniature and spread the ink around with a brush. And so I'm like, you know what? Let's control a little better. Now let's think about pressure. And then I'll get the brush. And you can do this also. Get the brush and like a dry one before you start and feel the different pressures. If you're going to go from light, you'll see you're still making contact with the surface. And then you start pressing. The harder you press, I mean, sure, you're going to cover ground, but do you need to press that hard? Sometimes you can just lighten up, and as you're moving, just stay consistent with the stroke, whether it's feathering, whether you're cross hatching, whatever you're doing as far as the step that you're at with the miniature also. Let me see. So I'm like running out a little bit of paint, but I know I could still knock out a little bit more. That just goes to show you, you could stretch that paint out pretty far before you have to go back into the pot. So finding time to paint is an issue. I know, I get it. But I mean, this is how long have we been painting now? What's the time frame right now? Is this?
Yeah, about 40 minutes.
40 minutes in, I have a base layer on a full unit, and I could call it a day. You know what I'm saying? And then I could just come back tomorrow and be like, all right, let's get back on and let's do the next step. And that, that's cool. You're maintaining that motivation. I think it's some things to keep in mind. That's why on the paint palette you'll see, I don't put too many pigment out because I'm like, I don't know how much time I'm gonna have tonight. I'd like to complete a whole unit, but you just don't know. That's one of those things that when you're at home, you have your hobby set up. Another thing is, I guess, the hobby setup. I know a lot of people are like, well, I can't paint, or I'm lazy to paint because I got to pull all my stuff out, and it's hard to have a designated area where you can just have everything ready to fire up. And I'm sure that is a big thing, right? Like you can say, hey.
Oh yeah, man.
You can say,
especially when your partner does their own hobby. So we got a whole
hobby clashing
sewing room out here and
trying to fight for the light.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using a desk lamp light. Adam also has another light setup that's nice and bright. Make sure whatever direction you're painting, don't cast a shadow on yourself. That's another thing of your tools hindering you from painting or like working against you. Is to have everything in its right position. If you need the right lighting, make sure it's angled right over the shoulder, whatever the case may be. Keep your eye on only focus on what you're doing as far as coding goes. I'm not trying to do the rest. Just tunnel vision while you're painting, sometimes that works. All the surfaces, I'm not attacking everything straight on. It's actually at an angle. Why? Because I'm trying to use almost that body of the brush. I'm not trying to, as much as I can, I'm trying to stay away from using the tip to help preserve our brush. So that's a layer for these guys. The first ones I started, now he already has the brown jacket, so I'm going to go ahead and switch it up and do his pants that color I was using. But I know while I'm doing this, the other ones are drying up, so you can start seeing, okay, what is translucent, what needs another coat, thin coat. Because if you're going to start layering more and more, make sure these coats are thin. Everything's, if I have, you're going underneath the jacket and up to a belt, there's times where you're almost pushing the paint and that tip is just going to sit right in between everything. So you're not going to push it into the whatever object you're painting. I like to just, if I'm dragging it forward, it's still going to get some pigment on there to just kind of get the base in there, and I'm kind of like letting the front of it just sit on or go against the edge of it. So if it's a belt, I'm going to go against that and kind of push down. So imagine if you're painting like your wall and you have what are those brushes? When you're like edging things out, the same concept. You're just going to edge it out and work on there. These guys look almost like a Desert Storm. Rebels. I already have a Rebel army painted, and those guys have more of that greenish vibe going on. They look like those that wood elf green. So I was like, you know what? This would be cool to make these guys that kind of like that sandy color. The Wookiees, what I did is, even though it's just to say, okay, like stormtroopers, people say, okay, why don't you just get a can of white? spray paint them all, get some black, do some details, and you're done. And I'm like, well, you can make it that easy, or you can have fun with it and push yourself to not let it be like, well, for instance, like the like your ARC troopers and stuff like that. You could have just got white, spray them all up. What was your technique to paint those guys?
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Loaded the white in the airbrush and just
Go to town.
Yep.
Imagine if you were to go extra steps there and revisit it now. It's like they make them that much more. But then again, it's like, hey, you're happy with them. That's objective. Like if you're like, you know what, that's cool. I'm getting them on the table. I'm painting, or I'm playing with them now. I'm good with that. You know. Again, it's all up to you. If you're done when you feel you're done, and that's perfect.
my thing is, I hate painting white.
Yeah,
I hate painting white.
white stuff.
So, like my ISP, I knocked that out. It looks great. I'll go grab it real quick.
Yeah, get it.
My my shadow collectives, love working on them. My clones, they're white.
They're just white clones. Troopers, white troopers, but can you make them white troopers with details, with that sandy kind of brushed look? That's pretty cool. I've seen a lot of people weather their troopers and they look pretty awesome. So you can tell you run out of a little bit of pigment from the brush, you go back in and just kind of start dabbing it a little bit just to kind of get those raised areas. Not too worried about how...
There's my ISP.
Oh yeah, this thing looks sweet. Look at that. Those details on there. You should be painting with me, man. Come on.
Next time.
Now, you have a chieftain, right?
Somewhere.
Yeah, 'cause I always see you play with Chewy. I'm like, where's the chieftain?
I don't remember who the chieftain is in the box. And just for...
That's the hard part. That's why I went ahead and customized this guy with like the whole mask thing. Because I'm like, he's just another Wookiee with a bow, and that's what's supposed to be the chieftain. Because I looked in the box, and it's like, oh, chieftain included. And I looked who it was, and I'm like, it's just any other Wookiee, you know?
Yeah, and that's why I've been using Chewie, because it's...
Yeah, that's Chewie.
I know it's different.
Right. Cool. So there's layer 1 for those guys. I'm going to come back and see little things that are kind of, could be used a little bit of a touch up. Usually the elbow areas are, some of these, I mean, don't get me wrong, the models are made great. Some of them are seamless. Like there's not too much to clean as far as mold lines go, but once in a while the mold line will affect. And what I mean is there are lines sometimes where you see the casting basically gets separated and it leaves that mold, that line across an area. It's always like on an edge or something, and that is hard to, it will mess with your details sometimes, so it's good to clean it up with I like these little hobby, I don't know if people use them for like nail filing too, but these are like the hobby files, and you can just go in smooth, just smooth them out a little bit. Some people will use like they have the sculpting, like the clay sculpting stuff, that works really great. So I'm just checking out, always looking around. All right, the hoodie a little bit, I can see that. Just kind of touch that up a little bit. Mainly focusing on those raised areas, especially if you know you're going to use a wash in one of your steps. Let's try to get that done. It's easy to get lazy painting, I'll tell you that much. It's easy to just be like, yeah, that's cool, I'll call it, and that's it. But then you're like, all right, do I want to push it further? Do I want to improve? Do I want to be nitpicky? Do I have OCD? So I know people that are like, you know, another factor for them to paint is because they are perfectionists. So on top of setting all their stuff up, they're like, once I paint it, I already hate it. And I'm like, why? That's just because I know I messed up here, Well, don't look at the negatives. Look at what you can do better in the next miniature. Or, okay, take a breather, come back. Maybe you're in a funk and come back and revisit it. and add another layer of whatever you think was bad. Dude, you get some highlights, get a detail brush. I mean, I guess talking to you guys as like focusing on the painting aspect, hobbying, gaming, I mean, it's all part of it. But if you're gonna be like, well, I try to create and I hate what I created, don't think that way. Don't have that mindset. Let's have a fun mindset. It's like the Bob Ross of miniature painting. Those rules. Happy little trees. Was it happy little mistakes? Just happy-go-lucky kind of guy.
We're gonna call you Omar Ross now.
Omar Ross. I'll take it. I need the fro when I paint. Yeah, make how he makes trees and he's just like Bob Ross in it. Yeah, that's what we call it. If you're gonna do a tree, you're just like, I'm gonna create a tree. That's a tree to you. That's a tree. Right, we're coming at a good point to switch to another area once we've done the clothing, cloth. It'd be cool to maybe take on the belts. Cool thing another thing, there's a few negatives of washes is, like I mentioned, a wash will muddy up your miniature. It'll dull down the vibrancy. Like if you think, oh man, this color's so bright, you throw a wash in it, guess what? Now it's dark. And it looks cool for some people that are going for that grim dark kind of look, which, I mean, I'm a big fan of that also. So, but I also don't want to look like these guys just ran through like the mud war or something. It's like I want them to still have nice detail. I don't want the wash to just be a crutch. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna use this wash to hide imperfections. I mean, if you're just trying to bang out all these miniatures, sure, why not? Like, let it, just for the meaning, for like the moment, let the wash kind of hide some stuff and then come back with highlights, because you can then, a lot of people, you can get to that point where after you've been painting for so long that you stay away from washes because you just build up your base tones and your darker values, and you don't need a wash anymore, because the purpose of that wash is to get into the lower areas, and it's kind of like the contrast paints, the speed paints, to have the surfaces raised. So you want to go with higher highlights, and then if you throw a wash in there, yeah, it'll kind of it'll bring down like a filter per se over your paint, and then you can go over that and just bring all those highlights back, but careful not to go into the recesses of the shades. So I think we can move on to the belts now. We have a few. I have some ideas for the belts. It'd be cool to make like a gray belt to make it stand out different. The mixes of colors, I mean, I've collected multiple different kind of paints. I like these Mecha primers from Vallejo. I have Pro Acryls. I have this is Scale 75s. This is a cool company. The Chimera paints are pretty cool. Mainly you can get a lot of the Citadel stuff at your local game store, but experiment with different paints. Like the values of these paints are amazing, especially depending on what you're trying to do.
And the different paints have different vibrancies, I guess is the way to say it.
Especially like those turbo dorks, those are insane.
Yeah, well, then look at this red that I got.
These are cool. I've seen these a lot with the model stores.
Yeah.
Like for planes, Gundams, and this red is awesome.
And that's most of the ISP was those paints.
So that red dried up. So did you primer it with like a gray, or did you go black with this one? Gray. That's another thing with primers. You can go grays. You can go that darker gray, the black. Some people did if you have like a red primer, if you're trying to do the base brownish tan to kind of work up how should I say it? Like if you're gonna have a certain tone going for the monitor, the miniature, you're gonna have. This is kind of what I did with this guy. I have the gray primer, white zenithal, the bottom's that brown spray
I just
up.
remembered I had one.
There you go. This is the handle I was talking about. So you get one of these guys. They will clip your miniature in place. So you can move it around. It's a good post. You can hold it. It's a firm hold. These are really great. I feel like I'm a little unorthodox when I'm painting. I'm like kicking it around upside down. I'm trying to really. So if I have it like this, it's hard for me to work with this at times. But I will use this. I just, when I'm trying to do a whole unit, I'm like, speed is the name. I only have X amount of time. I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm just gonna grab each one and go. But so now it's time to switch over. We're gonna do this kind of like a grayish color. It's very light, so it almost already has that diluted sense to it, or like thinned down. I'm gonna go for the belts. Belts, straps, things like that. These guys have little backpacks on, so I can maybe start attacking that. You can see it's very, very thin. This backpack had a lot of the primer on it already, so it was kind of black. So a lot of it, the zenithal hit it, so I'm going to kind of, instead of attacking the top of it, I'm going to start from the bottom. Painting, shading, and then work my way up. You can put cool, kind of like making like those field bags, the field backpacks. Put details on that later. So again, this is base coat 1, so I'm not trying to make it look very strong yet. I just want to get the first layer there.
Omar, you're at the hour mark. How long do you want to go?
We keep going.
It works for me. I'm just here talking. I'm not painting.
Right. We come back later and do so this guy has a little more visible belt. And he has some pouches, so we can do some different tones of pouches on him. Maybe an orange, like a vest for this guy. He still has the same concept of colors, but give it that.
So how much pressure are you adding when you're painting?
It's real thin. That's what helps to post. So I'm holding the miniature for a few reasons. We have gloves, so I kind of wanted to show you guys kind of what this looks like when I'm using, so you guys can see the paint consistency. But also we have oily hands, and whatever the case may be, I want to make sure I'm not having whatever I don't want to have the miniature just. It's helping you to have the protection over that, but the pressure is very. I'm using my post, and I could see the brush and kind of feel a little bit of that resistance, and I start moving. So I'm not kind of letting it, and keeping the stroke consistent. Whether I speed up in a few areas or give it that more of a lengthier stroke, it's kind of it's even when I'm going into the paint, it's not a very heavy stroke, because I'm being very cautious about where this is going to end, and so I want to focus on getting the detail as much as I can before I go into the detail brush and bring out other areas. This step is pretty easy because it's just kind of like, all right, there's a few areas I got to cover as far as belts, and maybe I can give them black boots or different shade of brown boot. But yeah, be mindful of your brush control and where it's the start and end of whatever area you're working on, because like I said, you can easily accidentally venture to a different area and you're like, oh man, I didn't want to paint that. No, I did, so I got to go back and fix it. It helps with less mistakes. So I'm just trying to get this first layer in. It's very translucent color, but it'll still be able to be depicted of what is gray, because I have an idea for it. We're gonna kind of brush it later and pick out a few of the heavies. When you're doing the first base coat on a miniature, maybe it has a a few things in the way that you might have caught while you're basing the first, like the brown. So I can now start getting, I can start to get rid of that. So this motion is, I'm trying to get the base, the beginning of it, where the start of this bag is. And I'm just trying to like, just brush everything across. Paint coverage, that's all that matters right now. You can dry brush this later with some cool, like a gray or something.
Bring it back towards.
Oh.
There you go.
Let's see.
I know, dude, I'm supposed to be talking to you, but I'm so like, I'm listening, like, okay, all right, that's how we're doing that.
Yeah, it's man, it's over the years. I kind of caught a lot of little details of stuff. I don't stop at one. Like I'm not this miniature. Some people could call it quits after doing this. Do a flesh tone, bring a beard, and you're like a beard color for this guy has a beard, which we'll bring the detail in a bit. There's a lot of things to cover. That's why I was like, man, there's so much to talk about as far as technique, tools, what to keep in mind, what goals are you setting yourself while painting. But you know, this is like, I'm not worried about how it's looking now until it's time to worry, and then you put details, and then you start, you're thinning, you're pulling out the color scheme already in the palette. You're like, okay, this is going to be the colors. I'm going to go for a brown tone, and I'm going to, there's one rebel that's kind of sticking out that he's a little different, or the heavies, I'm going to give them a different detail, but they're all for the most part going to have that straight across kind of thing. So but yeah, there's a lot of little things, and I like to pick from other people, other painters, like their techniques and what they do, or I'll see a mini and I'll just ask them, how did you do this, or what did you do for this, or I'm having an issue with, for the longest time I had a problem, like you said, white, it was an issue, but once you airbrush it, I don't know, I felt like white was cool, but then it clogged at times, just because it's like you're fighting sometimes with certain paints. That could be anything. That could be your PSI. That could be the tip isn't clean, but yellows, purples, reds. There are a lot of colors that are very translucent, and you have to just sometimes trust in your coats. Like just go through there, knock out one coat. You can still see the basing. Do another thin coat, and then all of a sudden you have a fully saturated paint on an area, and you're like, okay, perfect, this is what I want to see. Now the motivation's coming back. I know people are like, oh man, this isn't working, or I'm gonna leave it at that, call it a day, and we're just gonna move on. So this bag, for instance, his strap is going over the coat, which I painted brown, and I know it's to thin paint, so I know it's going to take a few coats to really drown out that bottom color, but it'll happen. You just have to give it time, let it dry. It'll look good. And there's ways to just watch. Once we layer some washes and then we do another set of highlights, you'll see, all right, this is cool. I will give it that. It's ready for the table. It looks good. There's things like that we can kind of just wait for it. It's just patience. You have you have a lot of unpainted guys, right? For the
I do a lot of unpainted, a lot of half painted.
Yeah.
I think next week I'll bring out my paints, because I got to paint my Wookiees and my Fluttercraft.
Yeah, that'd be fun. So a lot of the basing here, this shows everything I primed with, which is that Chaos Black. It has been like my go-to right now. There's another thing about priming. Make sure if you have a rattle can, put in some warm water for a little bit, and then shake it up really good before you just shoot it out. It might spurt, it might spit out paint the wrong way, so make sure you purge it a little bit and then go for it. There's a technique for that also if you don't have an airbrush, which is cool. I would like to do an airbrush segment because airbrushing is fun, and I can show you guys how to knock out almost like 50 to 60% of your minutes are just airbrushing and then going with a brush. A lot of people's like, well, airbrushing is cheating. There's no skill in that. I'm like, but I mean, you could make it technical. You know, you don't have to say, all right. It's the same thing with washes. You put all this work, right, and then I can just dump all this wash on these miniatures and be like, look, they're ready for the table, and they will look great after you completely layered everything with colors. And then you could just, but then some of the guys are like, oh, well, it's cheating. You just base coated everything, threw a wash, a few highlights, and that's it. But it's like, well, you can branch off of that. Like these guys aren't even highlighted yet, and I mean, you can see how dark it is compared to where these guys are a lot brighter. Check out the jacket colors, right? This is the example of wash, what's going to do. Now, let's check out the Wookiees. After I washed the Wookiees, I still went in, I came back, and I brought highlights above the wash to really differentiate, okay, this guy looks a little more orange tone. Their leader's a little bit more of the gray Wookiee. If you can tell this guy, his knees and a little bit of the forearm, a lot of this was done with airbrush. So I did the same thing. I zenithal primed, and then I shot it from upside down with that brown tone. This guy was going to be gray, so I dry brushed a lot of his grays, and then the more I went with the dry brush, I made him kind of look a little bit more of that gray Wookiee, old wise Wookiee kind of look to show this is the leader. I used the bronze with a wash again, and then I kind of give it that leather look for the straps. Real simple stuff. Simple techniques you can do to make it that tabletop quality. I gave some of these guys like that war paint. This guy has it, I believe. Yeah, he's the duelist blades. War paint. Put the leather at his shoulders. It kind of gave it that leathery look. And that bronze just really stands out. I can go and dry brush the metal on these guys and really give it a whole different look. But I don't know, I was kind of a fan. This is the chieftain, and I made him the chieftain because he's like, now he looks like a chief. He doesn't look like any old bowcaster Wookiee. And that little bit of additions I did, that just kind of it sets that tone. So now we can move on. Let's do some skin tones. I have, for our flesh, it's going to be Citadel, Kislev Flesh. This one's pretty good. It's brighter because I know it's going to come out as soon as we do a wash. I'm going to do a lighter tone wash from the Army Painter. They have a wash set also that I like because they have, let me see, this one was Quick Shades. So this is their wash set. This is a mid brown. And for between tones, I'll do like a dark tone. There's that mid brown, and we will knock out with, let's see, there's weapon bronzing and the light tone. So between the more of like the rebels, I'll go between light tone and dark tones, just to kind of give them the details. So I'll go in with the flesh, scoop that out. This guy I will switch over. Let me see. This one's a little bit more of a detailed brush. This one, it's considered layer, but it's layer small. So that just kind of gives you an idea that it's a thinner scale of it. Some of these guys have gloves, and then right now I'm just going to focus on their face. So we can kind of start seeing some skin tone on them. The heavy weapon has like a little goatee or something, so I'm going to kind of, even though I'm overlapping some stuff, I'll use the very thin brush and then just almost like hit the raised areas of that, and then that's all you need to show the detail of that. It's very, again, Adam was mentioning about the pressure. This one's very light. I'm not even trying to press that hard. And making sure that it's loaded with ink, with the pigment. And I'm just going to hit some of the areas that I want to, just to kind of show off the face. So they have this hat on, these little like helmet caps. So realistically, that's going to cast a shadow over the forehead. So you don't have to, I'm going to bring all this bright on the forehead. You can, but it's like, if you want to stick to that, you don't want to do eyes yet. Well, just get away with it and just cast that shadow There's I think the female rebel, so she'll have like a lighter tone. Yeah, it looks like she's wearing gloves also, showing a little bit of her like that wrist area, so I can tell that. Let's show that off a little bit. Let's see here. Have you ever ventured off of like trying to do eyes and all like the pupils?
Oh man, horrible. My guys had the googly eyes.
The Google eyes. That's funny. Yeah, there's some pretty cool little tricks to doing eyes. It's a lot of practice. Again, like push towards the practice and trust your process, the progress. Like just give it time. If you're barely getting into this, like welcome to the hobby. I know there's a few players that are starting to rise and hopefully pushing for more. It's just like one of those things that people have to give it a try. You know, escalation league is a great way to do it, to learn the game, to get your army painted in any escalation, and then you end up with. I know there's some Age of Sigmar escalations where you have 1,200 points in the end, and I'm like, what? Yeah, that means you have to have that many models painted. And in the end, that's great because that means you're gonna have that many more units painted, more brush time, more painting time, and then that last unit you paint is gonna look godlike because you just had all this practice. But I know people are just gonna, speed through it, which is cool. Again, there's a lot of ways to do it. You can speed through it. I'm gonna try to show you an effective way to speed. Like I'm gonna focus on skin tones, and then we'll go in and do some wash and show you what the wash does. And now I'm gonna just do like slight highlights and little details, and it's like, all right, call it a day. That's a unit, The post helps because I'm not too far off the brush. It's kind of like a pencil, but posting like my pinky's just kind of tripoding over it's the point of connection. You have your elbows, like one elbow's on here. My miniature is kind of a little lower. The hand that I'm holding it, and I'm just painting right over it, trying to just cover so I can have full control of where I'm gonna move it. Just like that, we're knocking out some tones. It's just great when a lot of these guys are like hiding some of their face. So you're like, all right, I gotta really get in there. A good way some people will do that is, I mean, again, it all depends on how crazy you want to get. But you can paint your miniature without assembling it, and then in the end assemble it. But think about it, that's gonna take some time. So it's like I know people that'll like have it all disassembled still. They have it if in the sprues they have it cut and they just put it on popsicle sticks or something. They paint it on these sticks, everything's separate, head, arms, all that. And then they go ahead and put it together carefully because now you're dealing with glue and stuff. And they'll do final touches, but they get all those hard to reach areas that are hidden by shadows. So let's say you do nick an area of the gun or something, like I'm working in this area, I'm going very careful going in there. And I nicked a little bit of the scope, it's fine, it's not a big deal because it's going to be predominantly like a black. None of their guns are really too shiny, so I'm just trying to focus on the skin, and then I'll go back and then start really picking out, okay, this detail is a little misconstrued, so I'm going to redo this or whatever. Thinning out these paints. Some paints, another thing is experimenting with paints is that you'll see they're, like you mentioned, some of them are going to be thicker or like a thinner paint. Try to experiment with inks. That's fun. The inks are cool. They're like the acrylic inks. They can be used as a wash, and they can also be used to maybe mix in for another color. I started using them a lot for OSL because you can that object source lighting, you can shoot in through airbrush. Like you'll start off with a white wherever, like for instance the lightsabers. So like Cassian has, you can't tell, I don't know if you can tell, but half of his face is more so lit up because I'm almost assuming that the light source is on this side, so most of this is more so the light source, and this is all shadow. So now this shows me that if I wanted to have like a glow effect, I can make it look like he's, I don't know if it's like an orange sky or orange glow, if you could put him in a diorama, or a red light or something, and you can have a red from all the white areas, like for Vader, things like that, like a lightsaber. That would be a cool thing to do to like an OSL segment. Object source lighting is fun, especially a lot of these guys have lightsabers, or the plasma gun, or like an ion cannon or something. The laser cannons. You know, if you remember from like the Hoth and all that, they have. They kind of power up and it shoots out like a red charge. You could do a cool red glow and make it look like it's charging up.
Hold on a sec. We're
Yeah.
starting to lose some frames. Try to catch it up real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know why it just jumped all of a sudden to losing frames.
What does that mean? It's like,
It's skipping a little.
oh, really?
Yeah. It's doing good and all of a sudden it just skips.
Tugging along though.
Yeah, we're skipping on that. That's alright. We'll call it. Let's go another 10 minutes.
Sure.
That'd be about an hour 25.
That's good.
We're skipping a little, but when we post it to YouTube, it'll be even.
All right. So then let's skip the tone and we'll go straight to, let's do 11 minutes. How about that? Let's see how much we can do in 11 minutes. I'm going to pull out this speed paint, High Lord Blue. This is a really cool, so I'm going to use the Z6 Trooper, right? Check this out. Go back to the thicker layer brush. This is a speed paint, so give you an idea of what the contrast will do, just to kind of show you guys. So I feel like the ion, it should be maybe a little more glowy on this side. So I'm going to just cover the areas that are going to glow. It's already zenithal, so no matter what, the white is going to shine through.
You bring it up a little bit.
Let's see right
There
here.
you go.
Cool. And it's really I casted the shadow on this end, so it's not going to be as vibrant. But since we zenithal primed this guy, not Optimus Prime, it's zenithal Prime. This is going to really show up. Now, just like the very front of it. So I can go from there. Now, let's show you what let's see, I'll give you the light tone on this guy. So his face is nice and dry. We'll pull out some light tone from the Quick Shade Army Painter.
But how long do you wait time-wise before you add like a layer on a layer?
So let's say I start off with my leader. If you guys want to lay out on your paint desk what's first to last, and you'll do the heavies towards the end. By the time you're between your third to sixth guy, or whatever, however many units you're doing, like towards the end, you can then go back and start layer 2, and then you can do like a wash. The washes are tricky though. Sometimes you might need very carefully use a blow dryer to dry it up a little bit, but not too much because they will get weak in the knees and they'll start bending. That means it's melting. So this guy is already fleshed out. His flesh is nice and dry. I'm going to go in through the face and check this out. You guys will see that the mid-tone, this is one of my favorites because, the light tone will actually really bring out like the cheekbones, and then you can switch to a mid-tone or darker tone and bring out the recesses of like the cheek and things like that. And again, that hat is kind of casting a shadow, so let's skip trying to stress yourself with doing eyes. Let's just focus on where like the helmet starts and stops and just kind of work that out. After I do this, let's do the wash over the miniature and I'll show you what happens. So I didn't do his gloves yet, obviously. Let's just try to like power through it. I'm going to use the Nolan Oil shade. There's a few of these. There's a shade, there's a gloss, which also has a different kind of effect. I'm going to go back through and so you can see his face is already kind of, the details are, after I added the skin tones, the details are already kind of poking through. So I'm going to use the shade, but I believe this is a gloss. This is the gloss version.
Yeah, it's a gloss.
Yeah, so they have, this one's pretty cool. The flesh flesh shade. So this one's more like a reddish tint. The one I'm going to use is more of a matte-ish finish. So the gloss is cool when you're going to layer something else over it. This is I like the way this dries up. I keep wanting to say heel, referencing like tattoos, but it's not. It's miniature. So I'm gonna go back into the same brush, the synthetic kind of old beat down brush that we have aside. Try to buy yourself an extra, or even like you can find one that has like that. Between size 4 to 6 is where you could find them. And then I'm gonna start I could just start with the bottom. You can see a lot of the details are gonna start coming out. I'm gonna
bring it up a little bit more.
Oh, here. So I'm not really gonna touch the front of the gun. I'm just gonna have, because I already had that blue there, and it's gonna conflict. So and also the face, because I want the mid-tone to stay light. So it's not a lot. I'm not trying to pull it on the miniature. If you ever see like there's a lot of like pulls happening, I just come by the brush and just spread, kind of move it around. The brush will go ahead and absorb a little bit, and you're able to push into another area. This is one of my favorite techniques of, like when I do use a wash, it's like, hey, I just need to make this guy look good and make him look good quick. Be mindful of the pools, kind of like one of the rules. And if you don't want the skin tones to be so dark, bypass the skins. Hit just like his clothing, maybe look at his gloves. They're gonna, without me, he's like wearing now like grayish gloves because I shaded it with this wash. Now it makes it look like I did add a tone to it. But again, that's why some people are like, hey, that's cheating. He's not really painting, he's just throwing a bunch of oil on it. And it just looks good though, and you can take it to the next level from here. So here's the top of the helmet. You see how it just like really made all that pop. Now I could maybe do a little bit on here from the front. And then if you're quick enough, you can get smaller brushes like these makeup brushes, and you can absorb it if you feel like, oh no, there's too much on there. And the brush is now fully saturated and I feel like I need to pull some off. You can just, this stuff takes a while to dry. So you can go back in with the brush, the makeup brush, and just kind of absorb it. It's like an eraser. I'm going to try to just, like I said, not hit the face. I'm trying to hit everything around it. Let's go to the pants. Trying to just really kind of move it around. You don't have to use too much of the oil. I have a lot of it. This is one of my favorite things. Like I believe I had a conversation with one of the guys at the local store one time and said, hey, it's hard to find that sometimes, the Nolan oil in places, because people pick it up because they know it's just such a good wash.
Hey, have you tried the new Nolan oil? Because they changed the recipe.
Yeah, they did change it, and man, I'm a big fan of it. Another thing you can do with these guys, if you get like the small hobby drills, you could drill out the barrels, and it looks sweet because now you can put detail inside the barrel. Again, that goes back to what I was saying. Like, how far do you want to take the hobby? Do you want to just paint, eventually progress, improve, and then, or do you want to like really like, no, I'm going to get into this 100%. There's a lot of things you can do. You can start drilling out all your guys' barrels. You can really start customizing from bits and make custom minis. You can give these guys that tabletop quality, but then during the week they're like on display or something. You know, there's a lot of things you can do with this. So the contrast is, the paint is already kind of drying up and is starting to show that higher rise areas. And now look at the differences between the tones with this wash. Whenever you're happy, you can kind of be like, all right, this is enough. I can kind of stop with the oil shade. I'm going to now show you what happens after the face is dried up. I'm going to pull out a mid brown. And one of my favorites, because I really wanted to showcase this, is hardened leather. So he has, the hardened leather is a reddish tint also, kind of like that gloss that Adam just showed. Here's the hardened leather. I'm going to use it on maybe just a little bit of the pants. When it dries, it gives it that darker contrast on top of the wash. So I like the way it dries. It has a really cool mid-tone value, and yet it showcases a lot of highlighted areas. So now he has that. Now let's show you what happens with the face. So I'm almost like if you're water dropping the ink into the face, like I'm trying to bring out the details of, all right, he has like that neck area. the nose, the mouth, the creases, and now it looks great. I feel like that's ready for you to take on the next step to highlight cheekbones, the nose bridge, the chin or the jaw, and then work for the eyes. And I feel like if you wanted to, you still have the blue out. You can maybe put a little bit more of it on this open side right here to give it look like the blue charges from here, and then it will shoot forward from this. I mean, you can get creative with it. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I feel like that alone, plus little extra details, you can add more browns in the helmet, change the straps, the back. I mean, and this was what, within an hour and
hour and a half,
you can have a whole army base tone painted, your base layers, little tricks.
Let's show them off real quick, and then we got to start calling it a night.
Cool. So let's move this stuff out of the way. So compared to what we've started, we have these guys that got their first base layers, their base coats, and it was roughly 1.5 pass. Now this guy has that very cool standout look with the shadows, the shading, and this isn't done yet. I mean, this would be like, we're calling it a night. We can continue tomorrow and just be like, hey, I'm adding my secondary layer of highlights now. Or, you know, the officer has he has like goggles. We can start doing some reflective goggles. Let's do a band, the strap on top of on their helmets. They have like that little band around it. You can do something to color code your units. These guys are, so for instance, this is like a brownish squad. Now we have the green squad to show, and then you have the Pathfinders, right? And then we move on towards, let me see. So you see the colors will bounce off the board. Sometimes you guys will have one miniature out, and you look at it after you're done painting, and it kind of looks, whatever to you. But when you have the unit together on the table, they look great, and you're playing with them. They're painted. You get to show them off. You feel better about painting, your artistic creativity and everything, and ability, and just push it. So I think hopefully this motivates you guys. There's another Z6. This is from the green. So let's compare these two. Same concept with the blue, but now I kind of showing you guys different color coding variations. So kind of, if you wouldn't want that dark, muddy look, obviously go back in and pull some highlights out, bring that tone out. But now careful with the recesses of the model, and just focus on just the raised areas and where you started off with the zenithal priming from the top, just to kind of help you guys pick and choose where your highlights will be and everything. And hopefully we get to do this again and push on. I would like, maybe I could just continue from this step to the next one and get more involved with the actual weapons and things like that. And then we could work towards basing, or we can work towards another topic of like the eyes or object source lighting. Maybe we could get like Count Dooku or something, or Yoda, something fun. And then I know we have the bounty hunters and like the robots, the droids. Those are another challenge because you can make them shiny, you can make them battle worn. It would be cool to do another. Maybe we can get together to do it like kind of like the corrosion or distress look, and how to do that with leather, how to do that with just certain techniques, and maybe get some more painting sessions in. But here's some basics, and there's a lot more to elaborate off of this. This is kind of just, let's get you guys put some paint on that brush, and paint some more miniatures.
Yeah, jump in our Discord, guys. We have a special chat just for hobbying. We love seeing everybody's hobbies. We also post them to our Facebook. I mean, we like being a big family here and having a little competition. Maybe we'll start a best painted monthly tournament to get people painting.
That'd be cool. We need to get more motivate more guys to paint and make that part of the hobby, not just the gaming part. Let's get some downtime, put some paint on the brush, paint on the miniatures, and let's show off what you can do. That's the creativity too, not by the book, not by illustration. Maybe you can create a whole different color scheme, all was it holographic looking rebels or separatists or whatever your faction is. They each have their own challenge and their ability to expand the colors. So thanks for joining us, guys. This has been great. Hope you guys, if you guys are starting the hobby, can pick some new techniques and ideas, or share with us some stuff. Let's get together. Let's get some more guys in the. I guess we could be like a painters guild. I know there's one out there already, but let's start our own. That'd be cool, like a Legion painting guild or something. That'd be fun.
All right, well, we're stopping our live stream. Everybody, thanks for joining us.
All right, guys, later on. We'll see you around.
Have a good night.